So good morning. Thank you for attending OSC's webinar today. I'm Dylan Schaefer, a staff attorney with the Public Contracting Oversight Division of the Office of the State Comptroller, also referred to as OSC. Today we'll be discussing important regulatory and threshold updates to OSC. And while this presentation will cover the updated regulations to OSC, it will especially focus on the updated regulations pertaining to the Public Contract Oversight Division. So I know many people here have already used the chat. Please feel free to ask questions through the chat function of this webinar and at any time during this presentation. If you have a question, just type it into the chat. I will answer any questions at the end of this presentation. And if we are time constrained or can't answer every question, we can answer any question after the presentation by responding through email. Additionally, we do also intend to post this webinar to OSC's website afterwards in case anyone would like to go back and refer to the contents of this webinar after the fact. So starting with the agenda for today, there's two main topics we will be discussing this morning. First, we will discuss OSC's updated regulations, starting with the timeline by which OSC's regulations were updated, the updates to Section 1, which is OSC's general rules, Section 1A, the organizational rules of OSC, and Section 3, which are the division rules. Then we'll move on to updates to OSC's procurement review thresholds. So looking now at the timeline, OSC's initial public notice of proposal on February 5th, 2024, and then the notice of adoption occurred on February 3rd, 2025. So the rules for readoption with all recodifications and amendments were intended to clarify the organization, functions, and powers of the OSC, as well as the reporting requirements for entities subject to its oversight. Amendments were additionally made for the grammar, readability, and to update codifications and statutory citations. So why did OSC update its regulations? Well, pursuant to N.J.S.A 5214B 5.1, OSC's previous regulations found at N.J.A.C 1744 were scheduled to expire in July of 2024. So as OSC filed notice of readoption in February of 2024, prior to that date, the original expiration date was extended 180 days. Readoption occurred on December 30th, 2024, and recodifications, amendments, new rules, and repeal took all effect on February 3rd, 2025. So these updated regulations reflect the first update to OSC's regulations since the adoption of its initial regulations. So the first update you will notice is to our citation. The previous citation, N.J.A.C 1744 1.1, has been updated, and our new citation is N.J.A.C 1970 1.1. So starting with that citation in 1970 1.1, the authority, purpose, and scope of the Office of the State Comptroller. The rules in this chapter set forth the organization of the OSC and explain its functions pertaining to the routine, periodic, and random audits and performance reviews of state agencies and all entities exercising executive branch authority. So the bold language here and what follows reflects the purpose of the Public Contract Oversight Division. OSC is tasked with the oversight of public contracting to guard against fraud, waste, and abuse. So this regulation was updated here to provide a better defined purpose of the division, which is that language that I just read that immediately follows the bold language, which is to guard against fraud, waste, and abuse. 1970 1.2 is the definitions. So on this slide, there are two phrases, post-award review threshold and pre-advertisement review threshold. These are two phrases that were used in the past regulations, but were not given definitions and are given clearer definitions in these updated regulations. So as we saw on the agenda, we will first discuss updates to the regulations and then updates to OSC's thresholds, and that will better explore what the different thresholds mean. Here, the definitions show that at the time the regulations were updated, between 2.5 million and 12.5 million was OSC's post-award threshold, and greater than 12.5 million was OSC's pre-advertisement review threshold. So as you will also note in these definitions, both these definitions contain or state that review thresholds are adjusted in accordance with N.J.S.A 5215C 10D. So since the adoption of these updated regulations, OSC's review thresholds have been adjusted as well, and we will discuss later on in this webinar where the thresholds currently stand. Another updated definition that we find in this section is third-party contract. Third-party contract defined here as a contract between a state entity and a third-party provider pursuant to the Attorney General's formal opinion number 21 of 1976 to provide services to private individuals who are eligible for public assistance or are also medically indigent to defray the costs thereof. And then examples are provided. So a definition for third-party contract was found in OSC's past regulations. However, it was a brief definition and at times resulted in some confusion over what qualified as a third-party contract. So the definition has been updated and revised here to provide clarity to that issue. Examples are also provided. And most importantly, this definition was updated to include reference to the AG's formal opinion number 21, which can additionally be consulted. So moving on to 1.5, records designated as confidential. OSC has strict confidentiality rules that it is bound to. And this is an area that OSC has at times received questions or concerns about in regard to providing documents or communication to OSC and the confidentiality that surrounds those documents and communications. So pursuant to N.J.S.A 47-1A1, or the Open Public Records Act, or also called OPRA, many of the documents OSC reviews would already be exempt from disclosure. However, in addition to records designated as exempt from disclosure pursuant to OPRA, this regulation further lists and clarifies what records shall not be considered government records subject to public access. And that is any record obtained by or from OSC during the course of an audit, an investigation, an evaluation, an inspection, a request for assistance and cooperation, a request for information, a performance review, a contract review, or any other OSC reviews. Staying in 1.5, further, this is a list of continuation of records that are not considered government records subject to public access. A complaint or referral to or by the OSC and the identity of the complainant, information communicated for notice and review by or between covered entities or contracting units and the OSC, except for written determinations designated by the State Comptroller as public records, any preliminary or draft report or letter, work papers, memorandum reports, plans, or other records that are made, maintained, or kept as part of any investigation, audit, or contract reviewed by OSC. And again, this list is records that are not subject to public access. So a small stipulation to what we just discussed is present in 1.5b. And B states that documents that were subject to OPRA or public access prior to OSC involvement remain subject to OPRA. Submitting a document that was previously subject to OPRA's public inspection, examination, or copying to OSC does not now make that document exempt from disclosure. 1.5c discusses actions that should be taken to preserve this confidentiality. When an OPRA request is received by a public agency, and I know of which there's many individuals attending this webinar here today representing public agencies and which are subject to OPRA requests, this may be of some importance. So when an OPRA request is received by a public agency, to preserve this confidentiality, the public agency's response shall not disclose the existence of the State Comptroller's request for such a document. And again, that is to preserve the confidentiality. 1.6 is the authority to audit or review contract records. A of this regulation reflects OSC's ability to request records from private vendors. Relevant records of private vendors or other persons entering into contracts with covered entities are subject to audit or review by the OSC. And so this bold section that follows is the updated language. Vendors, contractors, and other persons entering into contracts with covered entities should exercise sound business judgment in preserving documentation and data, which include, at a minimum, contract documents, purchase orders, and change orders. B of this regulation contains OSC's required language provision. All covered entities shall insert the following language in any new contract. The contract partner shall maintain all documentation related to products, transactions, or services under this contract for a period of 5 years from the date of the final payment. Such records shall be made available to OSC upon request. So please keep this subsection B in mind, which details OSC's required language for any new procurements. Moving on now to 1A, the organizational rules, and specifically 1A3, the establishment and functions of the Public Contracting Oversight Division. So as stated here in the title, this regulation explains the functions of the Public Contracting Oversight Division. The division monitors, reviews, and provides guidance on the solicitation and award process for contracts under the OSC's jurisdiction to ensure competition, transparency, public confidence in government, avoidance of favoritism, and that procurement processes comply with applicable public contracting laws, rules, regulations, and policies. So this regulation's wording is very similar to the previous regulation, N.J.A.C. 1744 1.5, but it has been updated and revised to include a couple things. So first, the division has changed names. Formerly, we were titled the Procurement Division of OSC. Now the new name is the Public Contracting Oversight Division. It's also been revised to include the division goals, which are to ensure competition, transparency, avoid favoritism, and instill public confidence in government. And the bold language on the screen is the revised language in this regulation that highlights the purpose of the division's guidance, which is to correct deficiencies in contracts prior to advertisement and to ensure future contracts comply with applicable procurement processes. So staying in 1A3, but moving to B, the division's ability to investigate and issue public letters and reports. And again, please keep in mind this regulation is discussing specifically the Public Contracting Oversight Division, not just OSC generally. And this regulation states, in response to complaints, referrals, and contract reviews, OSC may investigate to gather additional information regarding the procurement process, contract award process, and financial management and performance of contracting units, and may issue public letters or reports based on these findings. These referenced public reports are available and can be found on OSC's website. So the bold section is the revised and updated language. Information communicated by or between a contracting unit and the State Comptroller shall be considered advisory, consultative, or deliberative material for purposes of OPRA, as amended and supplemented, except for written determinations designated by the State Comptroller as public records, pursuant to N.J.A.C. 1970 3.9. So we've previously talked on a past slide of the regulations being updated to address OPRA, and you can see that updated again reflected here as well. So that wraps up 1A3, the organizational rules, and we will now turn our focus to Section 3, which details the division. So Section 3, the Public Contracting Oversight Division, we will discuss important updates to 1973, starting with N.J.A.C. 1973.1, timely notice of certain contract required. So this regulation contains an updated definition of contract, which now clarifies and includes references to any and all amendments, extensions, modifications, change orders, and renewals. Additionally, procurement notification and submission sections of 3.1 include reference to these amendments, extensions, modifications, change order, and renewals. This is an update to the previous regulation that was less clear in reference to these amendments, extensions, modifications, and change orders in its definition of contract, which amounted to some inconsistency in what entities were providing to OSC. So the regulation has been revised and updated here to better show what entities should be providing to OSC for review. So staying in 3.1, 3.1A and 3.1F contracting units must use the submission forms available on OSC's website and submit notice and documents electronically to OSC. An example of an OSC compliance form is on the screen now. So the submission form asks common questions associated with procurements that better help OSC review the procurements at hand. Such questions ask for the proposed advertisement date, anticipated funding source, contract type, if it's for goods, construction, etc., the contract term, if it's a new procurement, amendment, or extension, and also the method of procurement. So having this information and the supporting documents up front at the very beginning of OSC's review cuts down back and forth and shortens the time that OSC needs to review these procurements, which ultimately means that the procurements are being approved faster and that the entities can advertise sooner. So if contracting units are required to use these OSC compliance forms, where can you find them? So here's a screenshot from our website. And our website is nj.gov/comptroller, which will be displayed at the end of this webinar. So if you go to our webpage, there is a Submit Contracts button on the homepage. That if you click that button, it will bring you to the screen you're looking at now. Additionally, from the Comptroller's webpage, you can go to our Divisions tab, the Public Contracting Oversight Division tab, which also contains a Submit Contracts button. Either way, you'll get to a screen that looks exactly what is pictured here. So on this webpage, there's different types of submissions to OSC that are listed. There's pre-advertisement, post-award, emergency, and so on. So if you click on the blue hyperlink that corresponds to your procurement's correct threshold or review, that will bring you to the correct compliance form that we just saw on the last slide. So at times you'll see the review referred to by their statutes, and for clarity and also pointing to and highlighting the statutory basis for OSC's reviews. So here you'll see N.J.S.A 5215C 10B in reference to a pre-advertisement review, and N.J.S.A 5215C 10A in reference to a post-award review. So for shorthand, a post-award review can also be referred to as a 10A review and a 10B review for a pre-advertisement review. Moving to 3.2, determining the value of contracts. Valuation is important as some of OSC's thresholds are determined based on valuation of the procurement. So evaluation of contracts to determine whether OSC's thresholds have been met has not changed, but the language in N.J.A.C 1973.2 has been updated to clarify the process of valuation for contracts involving multi-year, multi-award, and optional extensions. So starting with multi-year contract. For a contract value is the total estimated value of the contract. The contract value is calculated by multiplying the number of base years times the yearly amount of the contract. This excludes any renewal terms, and potential contract extensions, amendments, or change orders are not included in this calculation. For multi-award contracts, if multiple contracts are to be awarded through a single procurement process, the contracting unit shall determine the total estimated contract value by adding together the combined estimated value of each contract. As you'll see in A here, 3.2a, when the exact value of a contract is uncertain, contracting units shall act in good faith to ascertain an estimated value. The individuals responsible for the procurement shall use professional judgment based on, but not limited to, prior procurements made by that contracting unit for similar goods, services, or construction work. So what documents should you as the entity provide to OSC as part of a procurement review? That largely depends on what type of procurement and what type of review you are subject to. So OSC has regulations containing lists of required documents to be submitted to OSC for each type of procurement review. These lists can be found in N.J.A.C 1973.3 for post-award reviews, also referred to here as a 10A review. And again, a 10A review refers to our statute, N.J.S.A 5215C 10A. 3.4 for pre-advertisement reviews or 10B reviews. 3.5 for emergency procurement reviews or 10C reviews, and 3.7 for a list of updated required documents for third-party contracts. So what are these required documents? Looking at 3.3, or a 10A review for post-award review, contains a list of 11 required documents or information to be provided to OSC as part of the post-award review. So such requirements include cost of the procurement, list of funding, the name and address of the contract partner, award of the contract, and a brief justification for the award. So for the most part, the information and documents required here and being sought here is the same that is asked for on OSC's compliance forms. So if fully provided to OSC with the compliance form, that can help OSC's review. Similarly, 3.5, which describes emergency procurements, and 3.7, third-party contracts, provides a similar list of required documents, and entities are encouraged to review these lists prior to submitting documents to OSC for review to ensure they are submitting the correct documents and information necessary. So turning to N.J.A.C. 1970 3.4, or a 10B review for pre-advertisement review, in addition to a copy of the proposed solicitation document, which should include the advertisement, invitation to bidders, request for proposals, or request for qualifications in final form, along with any specs. For a 10B review, entities are required to provide certain documents and information listed in 3.4, which includes a description of what is to be procured, estimated cost, funding source, estimated advertisement date, and so on. And again, this list can be found in 1970 3.4. So because 3.4 is pre-advertisement, the cost and advertisement date will not be exact, they will be estimates. And we talked previously about how to determine the valuation of a proposed procurement. So 3.4b discusses addendum for pre-advertisement reviews. So please keep in mind that a contracting unit shall have an ongoing duty to notify OSC of any addendum or clarification that would materially change the procurement process or award process following OSC's review, but prior to that contracting unit's receipt of bids, proposals, or quotes. N.J.A.C. 1970 3.6 discusses the process by which contracting units may request a waiver of OSC's review period. So OSC's pre-advertisement review period, or 10B review, is a 30-day review period. So contracting units seeking to proceed with an advertisement before the expiration of that 30-day review period shall request a waiver of the time period in writing. Such contracting units shall provide the information required at the time the waiver is requested and the reason for the waiver request. OSC will additionally respond to all waiver requests in writing as well. So we will try to honor the waiver request, but OSC is not obligated to grant any waiver requests, and at times cannot due to the large amount of procurements currently before the office. So when submitting procurements for pre-advertisement review, please be mindful of this 30-day time frame. And 3.8, 1970 3.8 discusses additional documents and information required for certain contracts. So two updates here we want to address are in regard to insurance contracts and competitive contracting. So for insurance contracts, in addition to the documentation already required, contracting units shall submit the insurance broker contract. And turning to competitive contracting, a contracting unit utilizing the competitive contracting process pursuant to either local public contract law, LPCL, or public school contract law, PSCL, shall provide OSC with the following documentation: the governing body resolution authorizing the use of competitive contracting, the notice of contract award published in the official newspaper of the government body, a certification by evaluation committee members that no conflict of interest related to evaluation of the proposals exists, and, if applicable, approval by Division of Local Government Service to engage in competitive contracting. So if utilizing competitive contracting, it may be helpful to review this 1970 3.8 prior to submitting to OSC. So turning to 3.9, determination of a contract review as a public record. So pursuant to N.J.S.A 5215C 10B, the State Comptroller may designate information submitted for contract review as a public record and make it public. The State Comptroller may provide notice to the public and a contracting unit of any violations of procurement or other law. However, prior to making any written determination public, the contracting unit will be provided with a confidential draft and the opportunity to comment or provide additional documentation or information which the State Comptroller may take under consideration. So there's already been some reference to our reports in this webinar. The photo on the screen now shows where public reports can be viewed on our website. And there is a tab titled Reports that if you hover over the tab, it will display categories containing all of OSC's public-facing reports. So 1970 3.10 discusses the requirements for record retention and production. So this regulation reminds contractors that, where applicable, all contracting units shall comply with record retention schedules as established by the State Records Committee pursuant to the Destruction of Public Records Law of 1953. And even if a contracting unit is not subject to that law, relevant records shall be maintained for a period of no less than 5 years after contract completion, and when requested, any contracting unit shall produce any record for audit or review by the OSC. And as a reminder, there was the OSC 5-year provision, which, as mentioned on a previous slide, is a requirement for new contracts. So 3.11 details the process of OSC approval, guidance, and further action. So for contracts meeting the pre-advertisement review threshold, the Public Contracting Oversight Division shall notify the contracting unit in writing if the proposed procurement process does not comply with public contracting laws, rules, and regulations, and identify any errors or deficiencies that compromise the purpose of competitive bidding. So the contracting unit may not proceed with the procurement process until provided written notice to proceed. So contracting units shall cooperate fully with the division during this contract review. Further, based on any deficiencies or violations discovered during the contract review, the Public Contract Oversight Division may conduct further fact-finding, issue a referral to an appropriate entity, or issue a letter or report identifying discrepancies or violations of law in the procurement process, or direct the contracting unit to submit and comply with a corrective action plan. So now we'll turn to updates to OSC's procurement review thresholds. So pursuant to N.J.S.A 5215C 10D, the State Comptroller, in consultation with the Department of the Treasury, shall every 5th year adjust the threshold amounts in direct proportion to the rise or fall of the index rate as defined in N.J.S.A 40A 11.2. So on June 1st, 2025, OSC issued a public notice that OSC, after consultation with the Department of Treasury, had exercised this statutory authority to adjust the threshold amounts with an effective date of July 1st, 2025. So at this time, OSC's updated procurement thresholds are now in effect. So what are OSC's updated thresholds? Well, as of July 1st, 2025, when the thresholds went into effect, all contracting units shall notify OSC of contracts that meet or exceed the following thresholds. For contracts involving consideration or an expenditure of more than $3 million, but less than $15.2 million, that contract and all other required documents shall be submitted to OSC no later than 20 business days after the contract award. So this threshold of over $3 million, but less than $15.2 million is OSC's post-award threshold, and as discussed in N.J.A.C 1970 3.3, also called a 10A review. Next is OSC's pre-advertisement review threshold of 1970 3.4, or a 10B review, and that threshold is $15.2 million or greater. So for contracts involving consideration or an expenditure of $15.2 million or more, procurement should be submitted to OSC at the earliest time practicable but no later than 30 days prior to advertisement. So a reminder on how to determine the valuation of a potential procurement was discussed in N.J.A.C. 1973.2, which discussed the valuation of potential procurements. Lastly, for emergency contracts, 3.5 or a 10C review for contracts issued pursuant to an emergency involving consideration or an expenditure of more than $3 million, contract and all other required documents shall be submitted to OSC no later than 30 business days after the award of the contract. And that is the updated OSC thresholds. So that reflects the updates to OSC's regulations and thresholds. Thank you for attending. I will now answer questions that have been typed into the chat if there are any. If you have any further questions, please feel free to type them in the chat now or reach out to OSC. On the screen is the Public Contracting Oversight Division's webpage, as well as OSC's general website. My email is also on the screen, and the OSC email that the contract submissions can be sent to is also on the screen. So this information can additionally be found on OSC's website. So please just give me a minute to review the questions that have come in and that will be coming in, and then we can go over them shortly. So if you have any information about fraud, waste, or abuse of public funds that you'd like OSC to be aware of, please submit a complaint to our office, which can be done by filling out the form on our website at that link, www.nj.gov/comptroller, emailing us at comptrollertips@osc.nj.gov, or calling us at 1-855-OSC-TIPS. And please keep in touch. To keep in touch, on the screen is OSC's social media presence for you to follow. Additionally, there's a QR code to scan if anyone would like to sign up for the OSC newsletter. And hopefully this webinar was informative or helpful, and thank you again for attending.